Now, I'm not gonna lie, I have absolutely no idea how to start this video. So, you know what? I'll spare you from my usual rambling and just get straight to the point. Today, we are going to be appreciating the best written character in all of Jujutsu Kaisen, Satoru Gojo. And yes, when I say appreciating, that totally does just mean glazing, but it needs to be done, so just stick around, I guess. From Gojo's early childhood to his teenage years, all the way to his last moment, this video is gonna deep dive into all of them and show you why Satoru Gojo is one of the best written characters of his entire trope. And that trope is, of course, being the strongest. There are also many themes and small details that you've probably never even considered before, so even if you dislike Gojo, you may still very much enjoy this video. Because regardless what you think of Satoru Gojo, there is no denying the insane impact he has had on the manga and anime world. So make sure to leave a like on the video, subscribe to the channel, and let's get right into the legendary story of Satoru Gojo. Now, as some of you may know, Gege recently answered a bunch of questions about the life of Satoru Gojo, including details about his childhood before joining Jujutsu High. The most important information about Gojo's upbringing that Gege revealed to us is as follows. Gojo was an only child, his parents are alive, but he was separated from them at a very young age to start his training, and instead of resuming training in his own clan, he chose to attend Jujutsu High as a means to get away from his overbearing family. Now, this information actually highlights one of the main things that I wanted to discuss in this video, and it's about how Gojo is a character who is often misunderstood, both by characters and readers themselves. You see, there's this common misconception that Gojo is simply a natural talent with an ego who was born into power. I mean, sure, there is definitely some truth to that, but what Gege has been trying to show us for so long is that Gojo's strength was something that he earned, not something that he was only born with. He was born into the Gojo clan with the Six Eyes and the Limitless technique, meaning that he was training since day one without getting any chance at a normal childhood. His youth was literally taken away from him before it had even properly started. Now, in the canon light novel Thorny Road to Dawn, Gojo actually says that he is the strongest Six Eyes Limitless user ever, which should then also show you that his level of strength is not something you can simply be born with. Otherwise, all the other users would have been roughly the same level of strength. Where this idea is best explored, though, is in chapter 262, when Yuta fights Sukuna in Gojo's body. Yuta reveals that the Limitless technique is actually insanely hard to use effectively, even with the Six Eyes. He then takes a moment to appreciate how Gojo's overwhelming strength was a result of talent and hard work combined. But to everybody else, it just looks as if the Six Eyes and Limitless are a cheat code that you're born with, which made it easy for Gojo to become the strongest, which is very evidently not the case. The fact that Gojo rarely saw his parents and was always treated as someone special within the Gojo clan means that the themes of isolation and being seen as a weapon were present since the day he was born. All Gojo ever knew was that people valued him for his strength. He also knew that had he been born a normal kid without the Six Eyes, then he would never have been treated like that within his own family. And so Gojo grew sick of a life within the Gojo clan and moved to Jujutsu High, where he met Suguru Geto, Shoko, Nanami. Fuck. And so Gojo grew sick of a life within the Gojo clan and decided to move to Jujutsu High, where he met Suguru Geto, Shoko, Nanami, and Haibara. And this, of course, marks the beginning of Gojo's teenage years. Now, Gojo choosing to move to Jujutsu High was, in a way, Gojo trying to forcefully reclaim his youth in an attempt to try and live a less isolated and sheltered life. And this definitely worked for a while, since at the time, Gojo still had not awakened and was actually considered to share the position of strongest with his classmate Suguru Geto. Together, they were the strongest, and until the events of Hidden Inventory, they were both happily living out their youth as best they could. But everything began to change when that cockroach Tengen assigned the pair to escort and erase Star Plasma Vessel Riko Omanai in preparation for her merger with Tengen. What's very important to point out here is that during the first stages of Hidden Inventory, Gege makes sure to show us moments of Riko enjoying her youth, but also accepting that she was born a Star Plasma Vessel with a duty to merge with Tengen. She is very similar to Gojo in that way, and Gojo himself noticed this. Hence why, in the beginning of the mission, Gojo is actually the one to decide that if Riko should choose against merging, then both himself and Geto would support and protect her. And of course, everyone knows what happened next. Gojo and Geto were both humbled by Toji Fushiguro, the Invisible Man, who also shot Riko in the head right in front of Geto's eyes. The result of which was Gojo awakening and then discovering the secrets of Reverse Curse technique. Awakening RCT therefore allowed healing, Reversal Red, and Hollow purple to be added to his already broken as hell arsenal. He became the definitive strongest and was no longer considered an equal to Suguru Geto. From that moment on, they were not the strongest. He was the strongest. There is one massively important difference between pre and post awakening Gojo though, and this difference is the change he made to his infinity. Before awakening reverse curse technique, Gojo's infinity was not always running. He had to manually turn it on and off because his brain couldn't run it for more than a few days without burning out. Once he had mastered reverse curse technique though, he used it to create a method of automating his infinity so that it could run permanently by constantly healing his brain with RCT, which of course was made possible thanks to his 6 eyes and curse energy efficiency. The very nature of Gojo's technique quite literally symbolizes his themes of isolation. When infinity is active, he cannot be touched. It is a literal barrier between himself and others. Before automating his infinity, he was happily going about his days with his best friend and equal Suguru Geto. But following Toji's rampage, Gojo automated his infinity to remain active permanently, which is also when both himself and Geto started to become more and more lonely. Now, I would happily spend hours appreciating Geto's writing, but this isn't his video, so I won't get into it too much. But just like Gojo, the very nature of Geto's own curse absorption ability and his recent trauma is ultimately what sent him down his new and darker path. But the straw that broke the camel's back for Geto was Gojo surpassing him and taking on more missions alone, meaning that Gojo's newfound ability to permanently maintain infinity quite literally represents the isolation that Gojo would face after the events of Hidden Inventory and Geto's descent into madness. This right here is what makes Gojo such an amazingly written character, and it's also why that panel of Yuji asking Gojo to drop his infinity so he can give him a pat on the back means so much to people. But we'll talk more about that kind of stuff later. Anyway, many years after the events of Hidden Inventory, Gojo is all grown up and becomes a teacher at Jujutsu High. Now, as Sukuna and Gojo both knew, he could just forcefully take over Jujutsu Society himself as a way to force change. But Gojo decided that the violent and forceful approach wouldn't lead to anything meaningful, which is a lesson that he likely learned from Geto taking the same forceful approach and ultimately failing. Gojo instead chose to become a teacher so that he could achieve a dream of his. His goals were very simple: to nurture the new generation of sorcerers so that they can grow up and bring natural change and reform Jujutsu Society. He wanted to save the new generation from the isolation that he faced and ensure that their youth wasn't taken from them. And this right here is exactly why he was so determined to save both Yuta and Yuji from execution, which had been ordered by the Jujutsu higher-ups. In fact, Gojo actually saved Yuji from execution twice by ordering Yuta to save him the following time in the Shibuya incident. Yuji and Yuta, the two main characters of Jujutsu Kaisen, actually tie into Gojo's character so ridiculously well, and I will get into that in a moment, but first I want to say this. Gojo did absolutely everything he could to stop their youth being taken right until the moment he died. He went out alone to face off against the King of Curses and managed to injure him enough for his students to jump in and finish the job together. But despite Gojo's efforts, the only ones that saw him as Satoru Gojo rather than the strongest were the two kids that he ended up saving from execution, Yuji and Yuta. And this leads us onto the main point of the video, which is understanding Satoru Gojo. As we have discussed, Gojo's sense of isolation stems from the fact that for most of his life, people only value him as the strongest instead of as a person. And this is literally the main theme of Satoru Gojo. It's that no one truly understands him. However, Gege actually wrote this theme so well that even some of the actual readers treat Gojo the exact same way that the other characters do. And let's be real, if it wasn't for Gojo's overwhelming strength, he would never have become such an immensely popular and loved character. There are many people who still believe he is just an annoying, arrogant, self-centered dickhead with a natural talent for jujutsu, which is the exact opposite of who he really is. People also like to argue about which characters truly understand Satoru Gojo, and they often argue specifically between Yuta and Yuji, the two main characters. Well, the fact of the matter is that I don't think either of these characters truly understand Gojo, at least not the type of understanding that Gojo talks about. My absolute favorite quote in all of Jujutsu Kaisen is in the airport chapter when Gojo says, "You can admire a flower and help it bloom, but you can't ask it to understand you." The flowers that Gojo is talking about are his students and the new generation, and no matter how much someone loves and appreciates Gojo, none of them can truly understand how he feels. But what's important here is that he doesn't want them to be able to truly understand. With Yuji and Yuta, they do not truly understand Gojo. They simply understand that they don't understand. They both see him and value him as a person, but they can't truly empathize with his feeling of isolation purely because Gojo dedicated himself to preventing them from ever experiencing that kind of isolation in the first place. The only character who would be capable of empathizing is Sukuna, but in in Sukuna's case, he simply didn't care. I mean, like he always says, he understands, and yet he feels nothing. Now, Yuji and Yuta may not be able to relate to Gojo's experience with isolation, but they understand much more than the others. However, there is a reason that Gojo chose Yuji over Yuta to carry on his dream, and that's because both Yuji and Yuta actually have very different approaches to understanding Gojo. Yuji understood Gojo's dream and strived to carry on his dream after his death, which aligns with his overall motivation of using his strength to try and help others. Yuta, on the other hand, was not trying to carry on Gojo's will or his dream. No, Yuta had decided for himself that Gojo deserved to be saved from that isolation too. Gojo's goal is to make sure that no one else ends up in his position. However, Yuta completely rejects that and wanted to become a monster so that Gojo himself didn't have to do it alone anymore. And this is made very clear in chapter 261 when Gojo tells Yuta to go away so he doesn't have to see the higher-ups get murdered. But Yuta just outright refuses and says that he won't let Gojo go it alone. Of course, this also plays into Yuta's character because his entire motivation is doing whatever he needs to do to save his friends. And it's from this mindset that the whole "I will become a monster" thing came from. But the problem with this is that no matter how much he wanted to save Gojo from being alone, Yuta is simply not a monster, which is why he failed in that ideology. But it's Yuta's focus on becoming like Gojo to save him from being alone that meant he wasn't really going to be the one Gojo would pass his dream onto. That was a job better suited for Yuji Itadori. It's actually been a running theme for ages that Yuta wants to save Gojo, since he wanted to kill Kenjaku so that Gojo wouldn't have to kill his friend again, and he also was the only one who tried to jump in and help Gojo when he was fighting Sukuna. Yuta and Yuji's approaches and mindsets may differ, but it's very clear that they both understood Gojo better than everyone else, even though neither of them can truly empathize or relate to him. And that's why Gojo's death is so well done. He died still not being properly understood, and that's good, because the only way anyone could truly understand is for them to have experienced it. The fact that no one else could relate at the time of Gojo's death is probably what brought him peace, along with Yuji continuing his dream. With all of the tragic themes and soppy bullshit out of the way though, I think it's about time that we move on to something a little bit more exciting. After all, it wouldn't be a true Gojo Glaze video without talking about the main event of all of Jujutsu Kaisen, which is Gojo versus Sukuna. Now, first of all, this is not a power scaling video. I really do not care whether you think Sukuna needed Maharaga or not, because the answer is completely irrelevant. The fact is that using Maharaga was the method that Sukuna chose and planned for. Whether he needed Maharaga or not doesn't matter in the slightest. Sukuna's intention was to beat Gojo using Maharaga, and Gojo was having none of it. It also just needs to be appreciated that Gojo, one single man, nearly did what everybody else in the verse combined couldn't do to a massively weakened Sukuna. And since we have never seen anything suggesting otherwise, Gojo was definitely the single most challenging opponent Sukuna has ever faced. Now, what some of you people forget is that Sukuna is so strong that he can go into a fight against one of the strongest sorcerers ever while handicapping himself like he did against Yorozu and then still winning low difficulty. But against Gojo, he went into that fight at 20 finger strength with the 10 shadows, shrine, and all of the information he could ever need on Gojo's abilities. And yet he still nearly lost because he made the mistake of underestimating Gojo's skill as a sorcerer. Sukuna likely saw how broken the Six Eyes and Limitless technique were and then figured that was the main explanation for Gojo's strength. What Sukuna didn't anticipate was Gojo's unreal natural talent and ability to improvise, like when he healed a burnt out curse technique and then effortlessly changed his barrier conditions to combat Malevolent Shrine's external attacks. In chapter 30, when Gojo finally burns out, Sukuna thinks he has won. In his head, it's all over and Gojo was just another disappointment. Everything that followed that point was not part of Sukuna's plan. He intended to end it in chapter 30, but the effects of Infinite Void meant that Sukuna couldn't use his domain either, which was obviously never his intention or something he expected to happen. As soon as Sukuna lost Malevolent Shrine, Maharaga then became the only way of beating Gojo. And what's even more crazy is that Gojo is the only character in the entire verse that full power Sukuna straight up cannot beat without a domain expansion. And Gojo makes that very clear when he absolutely obliterates Sukuna, Maharaga, and Agito at the same time. In fact, Gojo beat Sukuna's ass so hard that he genuinely had him nervous and screaming for Maharaga to save him. Again, it's irrelevant whether Sukuna needed Maharaga or not. The fact of the matter is that that is the plan he chose, and it didn't go anywhere near as smoothly as Sukuna intended, simply because Satoru Gojo is just built different. I also love the fact that Gege wrote this fight so that Gojo would win, but then also lose and leave room for the others to get their moments. I also love the fact that the last ever panel we see of Gojo while he's alive is him smiling with the caption, Gojo wins. Now, people complain that his death was off screen, but when I think about it, I would have it no other way. That final panel is perfect for his final moment. He died giving it his all and paving the way for his students to finish the job and carry on his dream. From beginning to end, Satoru Gojo was an incredible character, and his story was the single best thing that Gege ever wrote, in my opinion. I think it's also worth pointing out just how unbelievably successful Gojo is as a character. From Lobotomy Kaizen to TikTok edits to Mappa's incredible adaptation, there is simply no denying the massive effect Satoru Gojo has had, and he will be remembered as one of the greatest characters to ever come out of anime and manga. So for the first time ever, I'm gonna agree with Sukuna. You were magnificent, Satoru Gojo, and we will never forget you for as long as we live. Anyway, don't forget to like and subscribe, feel free to join the Discord and follow me on Twitter, links below. Thank you guys for watching, and I will see you in a bit. Also, go watch my One Piece videos, man, they're really good. Oh, and read Kagurabachi too, and then watch that video as well. Okay, bye.